So, thank you very much. Hope you loved the videos. Thanks for joining us and welcome to this amazing session at CASA, where we want to explore and learn about urban mobility with an amazing guest, Jinhua Zhao. Jinhua is also a nice guy who we've been talking a lot on the last minutes. He came with the same blazer to be as nice as in the picture, so we also appreciate that.
Right, it's authentic, right?
Well, no, we want to elaborate on a topic, but we want to do it in a different way. We're discussing on that, and when talking about mobility, people tend to think basically in terms of infrastructure. So people tend to think, for example, if there is a good transportation connection, or if there is a bike path which is enough for the city, or if there is some parking available. But Jinhua understands that this has to be addressed in a different way, and you believe, which certainly it makes sense, that we need to think on people. It's not about cars or infrastructure. We also need to understand people. And we need to understand why people is choosing to move from A to B in a certain way and not in another one. And that's what Professor Jinhua Zhao calls this emotional travel or car pride. We'll talk about that, and we'll talk about many other things, as you'll see. But Professor Jinhua Zhao is the Edward and Joyce Lind Associate Professor of City and Transportation Planning at the MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He integrates behavioral and computational thinking to decarbonize the global mobility system. He also founded and directs the MIT Mobility Initiatives. He hosts the MIT Mobility Forum, directs the GTL, Urban Mobility Lab and Transit Lab at MIT also, and he's been working with transportation authorities, which is also interesting to debate how you did it worldwide, because you did it in London, Chicago, Washington, D.C., Hong Kong, and also been working with cross-cutting cultural learning between cities in Europe, Asia, and North America. So welcome, thank you very much for being here. It's an honor to have you with us. Professor has lots of things to share, so I'll give him the floor in a sec. The idea was that we're going to fragment a bit the conversation, but since we had a lovely coffee upstairs when he was saying that he wants to move MIT to Barcelona, something like that, you said. He even asked permission to your wife and family, but he wants to move to Barcelona, he's in love. We were having a coffee and said, why don't we make this a bit more, let's say, interactive? And I said, of course, I'll follow you. So he's going to present this, and we will interrupt him. And I said we, because I invite you to help us to bring this session into something more enrichable, let's say enriching. Of course, I will bring many questions, but if any of you is really interested in something at a certain moment, sometimes if we leave it for the end, we lose the energy on that. So just bring it and say, I would like to ask this. And we'll try to address it into the conversation as far as we can learn from you. So the floor is yours. Go ahead, and I will interrupt you briefly, but I will do it.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much, people. And good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining me. I've been here for 3 days with my wife and 2 kids here. We really fell in love in Barcelona. We said, wow, we should really find more excuses to come back here, right? So I titled today's talk as Emotional Travel. As people mentioned, if you're a transportation professional, right, you think of transportation as a kind of a mundane daily chore, right? But I argue differently, right? People actually attach a lot of emotional and social meanings into how we travel here, right? So throughout human history, we invented a fantastic set of technologies that help us move from A to B. MIT actually contributed to many of the specific technologies, right? But my question is, have this technology translated into the betterment of the urban mobility system as a whole, right? Give you one example. How many been to China before? Raise your hand. How many been? A few, some of that, right? Great, yeah. So that's what you see typically in the big cities in China, many places like this. But a few of you maybe have been to China 30 years ago. If you look at this picture, what's in the picture here? People, right? Pedestrians, yeah, pedestrian, bicycles, what else? Public transit, on this, right? So over the 30 years, technology clearly improved. But is this a better system or this better system? I think we as transportation professionals, we're utterly confused. After 30 years, are we making progress or not? Right? Here, I'll skip this. So what defined the future of mobility? right? There are many areas, many exciting things. For example, many technologies coming at us, electrification, sharing, automation. I just listed a whole set of like startup companies coming into mobility. This is actually one of the most exciting areas. All the venture capitalists try to get into this. Whole set of technology from micro mobility, urban mobility, intercity mobility, also the long distance, the urban air drone, etc. Another set is in the logistics side. During COVID, I think everybody understands the e-commerce, everybody buying online, etc. Whole set of things, right? But here, I want to say that not only technology and data has changed, I want to add another aspect, which is what we define as a value within transportation also changed. For a long time, we think transportation, what do? We solve congestion problem. But today, I will argue that we also solve a sustainability problem, solve social justice problem, personal identity problem, right? So urban creativity problem and public health problem. So it's a much richer set of objectives being attached to transportation today. All right, so what will define the future of mobility? For me, I will give an answer that is a combination of a behavior and a computation, right? So tonight, I will give a flavor, what do I mean by behavior thinking? And then computational thinking, I will skip it, that we'll find another time. Hopefully I'll come back to Barcelona again for another reason for the third two. But third one, I'll try to bring the two together. So to show the power of combining the behavior and the computational thinking and how to help with urban mobility, right? So how to change behavior? I want to show this to say that that's one type of behavior here, right? Of course, this is not just for you to just have fun with it, but to say that you cannot explain this behavior with traditional transportation theory here, right? So you need today, I try to ask three questions. Is travel social? Is travel emotional? And is travel time absolute? I don't know how many of you are in transportation domain. If you're trained as a transportation engineer, you will think these questions are utterly bizarre. We don't ask this question if you're trained in this domain, right? But I think if you take a more humanistic view of transportation, they will find this interesting. Let me start with time, right? Time in Newtonian physics, we think time is linear, one-directional, and absolute, right? And then in transportation, how we think of time? We say travel time is wasted, of negative utility, and to be reduced, right? This is a classic notion of transportation, right? And based on this structure, we develop these type of models, right? This is the only mathematical equation we'll show and skip for tonight on this. It's to say that people follow a very utilitarian view of transportation. We calculate the utility of each option, and we maximize it. It's a very rational agent assumption here, right? I took this view when I was a student for a long, long time until, of course, this is Barcelona. I noticed this Surrealist Dali. I just visited this cybernetic exhibition yesterday. It's fantastic if you haven't been this really. Particularly this picture, right? This picture, for me, it really tries to reject the notion of rigidity in travel time and travel space, right? That's how engineers have been thinking about transportation all this time, right? This really shocked me to a different understanding. So what this means, for example, autonomous vehicle. What does an autonomous vehicle do, right? There are many aspects, but one aspect of it, it changes the way we perceive time, right? So if you take 40 minutes in the car, is it 40 minutes still 40 minutes? Or if I can use the 40 minutes meaningfully, how does that change my perception of time, right? So for example, if you visit these future centers of all car makers around the world, you'll see this car can become your personal clinic. You can run in it. You can get the treatment in it. You can have sauna in it. All sorts of imagination of how change the way you use time in transportation, right? Here in Singapore, this actually my family. MIT actually contributed some of this automation process. We put these sensors into that, and you can study how people perceive autonomous vehicle cars. So you use this technology. This is the a neural headset. This is to measure your heartbeat. This one is to measure your sweating. You try to understand when you are in an autonomous vehicle, how do you respond emotionally and physiologically, right? Here's some like a brainwave you can check. And the particular thing is to say there's a learning process here. When there's a new object, people take time to learn and adapt to this new technology. And particularly if autonomous vehicle changes perception time, it will change travel behavior and fundamentally change the urban structure. That's the bigger impact of this technology. Here, there's also technology used to understand this emotional matter now. Right? I'll skip this more complex thing. But then I was to say that given you can think about perception of time instead of absolute time, then what you can do is you can manipulate the information. I'm using the word in a neutral way here, right? Not good or bad. This example in London, if you're familiar with London, you go to London, you see this type of map, right? This is the subway map, the tube map in London. You would think this is a map representing the reality, but actually it distorts the reality significantly, right? So when we convey information, we distort it. For this time, this case is for good purposes. It's try to preserve the simplicity and so people to understand the topological structure here, right? All right. Then another example. How many heard of the country Maldives? Heard of the country Maldives? It's a tiny, tiny country in Indian Ocean. So this is India. If you notice, this is Indian Ocean. It's a tiny country. In most maps, you wouldn't see this country there. It's a bunch of islands, right? You blow up like this. So my family visited Maldives a couple of years ago, and you first of all flew from Singapore to Malé, this capital city, right? Then you take a small plane to another island, just barely landed the plane. Then you take a boat, finally to get to this island called the Malacca Island. But then one thing, when I landed, I find this island have a different time from its capital city, Malé. Remember, this is a tiny, tiny country, right? You couldn't see it. But this island have a different time zone from the capital. So ask the manager, what's going on here? My clock is wrong or something. But he said, no, it's not wrong. It turns out, as a manager of the island, what time the island should be is entirely my discretion, right? For that, I was utterly impressed, saying this is like godlike power. You can change the time, just like arbitrary. I said, okay, you have the power, I'm impressed, but why do you do that? Right? Why do you change the time to be different? He said, my island, the most interesting scene of the island is the sunrise in the morning, right? But for most Westerners, for them to come here, wake up at 6 o'clock to see the sunrise, that's too painful. I cannot wake up at 6 o'clock. So therefore, I change to 7. Right? So people wake up and see the sunrise. This is the first time that people can literally manipulate time. But here the point is, in transportation, we do all of things like that as well, right? Okay, so we talk about the Dali's view. You can also talk about Einstein's view of travel time, psychological view of travel time, and transportation views of travel time. There are different ways you look at this mechanical process in a more humanistic way. Right? So that's the first one. The second one is travel emotional. Right? Here, let me start with the notion car pride. In America, in the United States, you often see this stereotypical view of public transit versus car, right? For European citizens, that's just like odd to see this, right? But sadly, in many cases, people do look at public transit or car in this particular way. There's a positive and a negative association with the different transportation mode here, right? Here, we actually did study this in Shanghai. We literally ask people, say, I would own a car even if I do not need to travel, right? If I do not need to travel, do I need a car? I thought, okay, some people are crazy, they do that. But half of people said yes in Shanghai, right? So that means that I buy a car for something more than moving from A to B. I think many of us probably have an intuition about this, right? So then further we ask the question, do you feel proud of owning my car? It turns out this majority of people either partially agree or strongly agree. So a lot of people actually agree with this statement, right? Then we went a little bit further, try to really define this concept. We say, first of all, you have to have an idea of having a car, right? The first question, does this idea symbolize, right? If it doesn't symbolize, then you are car neutral. There's nothing special about it. I totally look at this mechanical process. But if it does symbolize, then I ask you, does this symbolization of car relevant to my identity or not? And then if it is congruent or consistent with my identity, that's car pride. But if it's opposite to my identity, it's car shame. Car shame is, you probably haven't heard this term before. For example, at MIT, many professors teach sustainable transportation, right? The student will ask you, oh, how did you get here today? Some professors say, well, kind of a little bit hesitant. Oh, I drove here. Sorry about that, right? So why you have to hesitate? It's because there's some car shame going on here, right?
Can I ask something?
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you have a car? You own a car?
Yeah, I do. I do. Yeah.
Just a quick question, sorry.
That's right. When students ask the question, I often then can quickly add, oh, I have a Toyota Prius here. Nobody asked me about that, but I just say, oh, the electric car, so I not as bad.
Are you proud?
Yeah. Pardon that?
Are you proud with your car?
No, I don't. Right. That's a little talk about the gender differences on this. Right?
We'll talk about that.
Yeah. Right. So that's a structure. And given this, you can measure this with a set of questions, psychometric measurement, to really quantify this notion. Right. And then you can link it to the travel behaviors. Right. For example, it turns out that if you're high pride, you're more likely to buy a car. You more likely to buy a luxury car. And in the usage, you're more likely to choose car as the mode to travel, and you travel more. Right? It turns out that the correlation between car pride and car ownership is as strong as your income level, right? But previously, income is the most important driver of car ownership. In terms of car pride, is as important if you marry the property here, right? So that's one. And then let me give you another notion of this emotional understanding about transportation mode across the world, not just in Shanghai. This is in London, where I worked for 2 years there. There's a quote that's in the 1980s, misattributed to Lady Margaret Thatcher, says, a man who beyond age of 26 finds himself on a bus can call himself a failure, right? You cannot be more emotional than that, right? People literally attach the fact that you're riding a bus to you yourself as a person being a failure, right? That's, of course, dramatization by Thatcher. In the 1980s, the bus system were very bad, right? But by the time I was working at there, 2006 or 7, I find it rich or poor, black and white, young, old, they all use public transit. So not only is it powerful, but things can change, right? In fact, in 2008, the mayor actually took the bus to Beijing to receive the Olympic flag. So the bus from being a failure to be a pride of a city here, right? All right, so move on to this. The question, is travel a mundane chore, as we described, or does it have a higher meaning attached to it? Right? It turns out that if you look at all aspects of life, clothing, food, sheltering, traveling, all of them have some element of utility and have some element of vanity here. Right? The vanity part, that's what I try to introduce in our understanding this. All right, so finally we did an international comparison. This is between Shanghai and New York City. You'll find that New York City has, Shanghai has reasonably comparable between the two. And then there's another one between New York City and Houston. I picked in the two extreme here. New York City probably the most like pedestrian transit-oriented, while Houston the car-oriented. You can see that Houston has a much higher car price, but still quite high overall. Then we had the luxury of looking at the car price across 51 countries that have an international comparison. So this is y-axis. The higher up here is a higher car price. The lower here is a low car price. Right? If you look at which countries have the highest car price, this is Kenya, UAE, India, Vietnam, Philippines, Malaysia, Thailand, Egypt. You can get a sense of what
Why is that for?
Right.
Why is it?
Yeah, you can. I like people to think about this. Right. This is mostly in the developing countries while having this very high price. Right. And this side, the lower car price, Japan, Ukraine, France, Greece, Chile, Australia, Switzerland. Where Spain here, right? Quite low price, right? To people's question, I want people to see why is such a case, right? Let me first tell you the general pattern here. The developed country, like this black dot, generally have a lower car price, except United States here, right? That's the only developed country has a very high price here, right? So yeah, well, why this case? Yeah, you get used to it. I mean, developed country, you can think of, what's the big deal? Everybody have a car, right? I don't know, right? So why in developing country this becomes so high here?
Is it an aspiration thing?
It's an aspiration thing. So here, when I say car price, you see, it's the idea here. It's the idea of having a car that's powerful, right? Anticipation to have a car that's powerful. In these countries, many people, they don't have a car, but they know what a car is. They know what a car can do, right? The aspiration drives really up here. So these countries, if you think about this, today they have a higher desire, but they have a low affordability, right? They don't have the capacity to buy it yet. Okay.
Yeah, I think also in the developing countries, the public transportation is probably not as developed, so it's a big chore to go
on your car.
Public transportation. So people aspire to drive a car and be in your own private space.
That's another good reason here, right? Here you can think of the many ways. So one is to say that to prove it to yourself, right? Say I'm established, I can own a car, or to show off to other people, right?
But Jinhua,
Yeah.
because we were talking before about all these, and we were discussing a lot of things, and one element that I can see it's quite noticeable is that at least in Europe or in Spain,
right.
for many young kids to have a car, it's like the first sign of pride, majority, adult, you're an adult, you get a car. So that's like a super strong concept connected to your brain. So I feel like now I'm an adult. I get my car, I get my friends, I get my girlfriend, or I get my boyfriend, or whatever you want. No? So that's really strong.
That's very much so. Let me tell you the opposite end of that story. So when you're a young man, you get your car, you feel, oh, I'm adult. We also studied in Canada when people get really old in their 80s. How do you convince them to get all of the car, right? So you're not safe to drive anymore, right? For that, we find a strong gender differences. The women are actually rather rational. If you tell them, grandma, you cannot see things very well, don't drive a car anymore, they give you the key. But if you talk to your grandpa, they'll kick you out the door here. This is my last bit of my ego, of independence. You're taking it away from me, right? So that's how strong this type of
exactly. But that means it's a very, very strong element in your soul, let's say. I was talking before to Jinhua. There is, probably some of you have heard about him, a guy called Edward Bernays, who was the father of the PR, public relations, and he's the responsible for example, the American breakfast. So the fact that the American breakfast is an American breakfast, the way we understand it, is because probably a sausage company said, hey guys, we need to sell more sausages. So they made a very patriot kind of breakfast saying this is the American breakfast. Or the tobacco company hired him to try to seduce ladies to smoke because they realized only men smoked because that was not accepted at that time. So he turned that cigarette into torches of freedom. Wow. And there was a revolution, and then women started smoking. So it reminds kind of something very profound.
Right.
Very deep.
The pride, this concept pride, is part of human genes, right? That's one of the very fundamental emotions. But associate pride with a particular product, that's artificial. That's how we collectively created. It's a social construct there, right? So here, people have to take pride in something, right? So you can take pride in car. That's what, including we're sitting in CASA, right? Car makers. So we did all of that. You can also associate pride in many other things. Yeah, you can say the pride of, say, saving the world, reducing carbon, for example.
And we feel very good when you're in your car and you drive from a place to another one.
Right.
You feel like comfortable. There is a question over there.
Yeah.
It will work. No worries. There.
That's. I'm from the United States. I'm living here now. In the U.S., I own 3 cars.
Yeah.
I own a van, a Ford Econoline V8 cargo van, and 2 pickup trucks. Yeah. But in the United States, you talk about pride, and have you looked at how the sense of pride and ownership of a car is constructed by the car companies? Yep. For example, after World War II, the United States had an extensive public transportation system. And you probably know the story, how General Motors started buying up the transit systems, particularly in Los Angeles, and phased them out. Right. And created the need for cars. There was no other way to get around. Eisenhower created the interstate highway system, which created the suburbs. And so after World War II, there was this massive social migration to the suburbs. Now we're in this state in many cities in the United States, for example, Miami, where you cannot move your car during rush hour. There's too many cars. Yeah. But have you looked at how that desire, that pride, is actually constructed by the companies that have a vested interest in selling the product?
Yeah, very much so. There are several things I want to say to that, right? One is the urban structure, right? So in many cases, in American particularly, having a car indeed is a necessity, right? As an individual, you cannot change urban structure single-handed. So given that structure being defined, you don't have much options, right? So that's one area. So for example, if you live in Barcelona, you probably really don't need a car. I mean, you can travel so freely. But not many American cities look like Barcelona, right? That's saying all my colleagues in America who are doing city design, transportation, I really encourage to come here to see what city could look like, right? So they have a different imagination there, right? That's the one thing. The second thing about this construction of pride here, right? Let me quote some. 2017, Mercedes-Benz as a company spent $200 million on advertisement in the U.S. alone, right? They sold some 300,000 cars. So if you convert that, they spend about $2,000 per car on advertisement. What they are doing is construct such a pride. $2,000 per car, such level of investment to construct this notion here, right? As indeed, that's very much entrenched in the process there.
I would like to ask you a couple of things now that you're with the pride element, and we'll keep on going. Jinhua was saying to me before that he wants everyone who works in a city, urbanist, architect, or colleagues to be in Barcelona for 3 months before they start building anything around. But apart from that, 2 questions. First, you said about when at the 80s, certain places you have to say, Mom, you cannot drive the car anymore, and she would understand while the man doesn't. But you told me before that gender, or there is not a huge difference in terms of gender regarding to pride. And the second one is, how do you measure pride? Because as you explain in your paper, Jinhua has a really interesting paper in where he researched about China some years ago, and in the paper you talk about some core self-conscious emotions which, along with the pride, shame, guilt, and embarrassment, are really strong. How do you measure that?
Right. So, first question on the gender difference. Right. I should be careful here. The statistic, if you look at on average, gender's impact is not statistically significant. That's on average. But individual variation is significant there, right? So there are many pro-car males, many pro-car females. It's just somehow, on average, they wash it out with each other, right? So there are major differences here, right? Second one about the methodology, there are 2 different type of methodology. One is they call it psychometric measurement. I skipped this a minute ago. That's a simple, let me see if I can find that. It's a simple way of doing that. That's developed by psychologists. They ask you a whole set of questions, like I feel proud of owning a car, driving meets my self-esteem to some extent, I have a sense of accomplishment after buying a car is a status symbol. So they ask you a bunch of questions, they ask you, do you agree with them, etc. By consolidating this, they call it the latent variable, then you can capture the latent concept, that's car pride. So that's why we're doing that, right? There's more other concept called the implicit association test. That's actually give you these computer games, right? To say that, ask you something, then you respond. It turns out if something is positive related, you respond quickly. Okay. So by observing the response time differential, you can identify some. That's some of the challenge. Okay. The more advanced one, of course, you can use neuroscience. You're putting yourself into an MRI machine. They can look at how your brain activity, which part of the neuron really lit up when you see different things that you get positive.
And just one last thing before you keep on going. You mentioned before the pandemic, and you were saying that pride is a very core element in ourselves. But with the pandemic, things changed. Because above pride, there was safety.
Right.
And how does that play in?
That's great conversation. We were talking about this before this event. The pandemic really made one of the most systematic and coordinated social experiment there, and mandatory. Right, everybody has experience. There's several things changed that. One is the whole remote working patterns. Right. So if my commuting is pleasant, I may still go to the office. But if my commuting is suffering all the time, I choose to work at home more, right? Of course, it's subject to the employer's design. Your boss says if you have to come here, you come here. And that's one thing. But the other thing is about the perception of public transit. You mentioned that safety is even more important emotion than pride, right? If you don't feel safe, it doesn't matter anything else. During the COVID early stage, public health become a major concern. So public transit riders really suffered. Even today in the U.S., I think it's only about 60 to 70% recover. Many of the transit agencies are really struggling. I feel like Barcelona, we are kind of lucky here. The system has very much kind of returned to the normal operation here. Right?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks, people. Yeah. So let's moving on this.
We were saying about the countries which are more developing, there were more pride. Yeah, exactly.
Right. So here, the future of car industry, right? I was talking to Seattle colleague here. Really depend on how much you can continue manufacturing the sense of pride, right? Be it autonomous, electric, or connected, right? Or even ask the question, should we, right? Give you an example. Now there's a movement of moving from ownership to access, right? The car sharing stuff, right? So one idea is let's treat mobility as utilities, like the water or electricity. But the thing is, if you treat mobility as utility, you will destroy the notion of pride. Nobody taking pride. Also, I get water from this company. Nobody talk about this, right? If you destroy pride, then you also destroy the profit margin, right? It's a good thing or bad thing, I'll leave you to judge on this, right? So here, the question is whether we can or whether we should, right? That's a different question here, right? All right, just by the way, in terms of vehicle design, right? You see, when we human beings interact with each other, we develop a whole rich set of emotions. We talk about pride, we talk about interest, you have anxiousness, boredom, interesting, excitement. But for car as a vehicle, human beings attach with car only one emotion. Just one, the car can only express one emotion as we design it now, which is anger. It's when you get stuck in the traffic, you honk at people, right? No car in the world today will say, sorry, I cut you off, right? Or excuse me. Here, I've been telling this for many of the car makers. Why make our cars more expressive? They're much better emotion we express than just anger and honk at people here, right? All right, so that's the second part. Let's move to the social side. I know many of you saw this movie called Ants, right? You ask the question, why ants don't run into traffic jam? Well, we do, right? So you think about it. The ants, they don't have this intelligent transportation system. They do not even have a Google map to guide them, right? But somehow they coordinate, but people largely fail to do so, right? So there are many areas you can look at this. This is research done on the social mobility sharing, try to look at this Uber pool and Lyft line. Here, try to say that if two people have a similar travel time and close enough origin destination, can put them together, right? You can think this as a very complex mathematical problem, and many of my colleagues at MIT, myself included, work on this problem. Right. But I try to argue that that's only half the story, which is the physics. Right. However complex, is a definable mathematical problem to put trip together. But more importantly, it's actually psychology, because when you put two people together in a car, something happens here. Right. Let me give you an example. In America, Uber, Pool, and Lyft line. As of today, neither company is able to find a pricing point that's low enough to attract people to share and high enough to make any money, right? So the notion of sharing a car with another stranger in America is just tough on this, yeah. So that takes a lot of effort to understand the psychology and how people interact before we can make this happen, right? Right, so here I wouldn't get time to talk about more this, just to say that you can look at many different ways of the social interpretation of travel, including the psychology of cooperation. Also talk about, will you do this because you want to do good or do well? Right, intrinsic motivation or extrinsic motivation. You can ask, do we really make our own decision, or are we just following the herd, right? Because other people do, therefore I just follow, right? And the last one is mingle while traveling, to see transportation as a social space. Before the session, people we were discussing about that when I was working in London, the mayor, Ken Livingstone, has an urban design strategy he wants to do. Implementing in London. He looked around his department. He asked Transport for London to implement his urban design strategy. Many employees in TfL says, we run trains. What do we mean by urban design? Why you ask us to do that, right? But later you realize that's actually a very good strategy, because much of our public space in the city are transportation space. Yet the streets, the squares, the stations, they are meaningful urban design node. So here, for transportation professionals to have that notion, we are contributing not to people moving from A to B, but we're also contributing to the livability of the city. And that's the important part of the social interpretation. All right, so that's a few examples of what I mean by behavior thinking. I will argue that every organization exists to change people's behavior here, right? Here, for example, in transportation, we have a whole set of business decisions. My research is trying to translate this business decisions into behavior decisions. Right? For example, this electric vehicle range anxiety. That's actually to look at how people take risk, understand risk. Right? So each one of them you can take the similar view here. All right. So that's kind of a behavior thinking part. Let me. How are we doing in time?
We're good.
Yeah,
We've got 25 minutes left. So
all right. So I'll do a few more. So I just give a flavor about computation thinking here, right? Today, probably you hear the term the AI is coming, like so powerful, coming at us, right? Just give you one example what it can do. Computation, with computation, you can represent phenomena differently. You can predict, you can explain, you can control, and you can create, right? If you look at the DALI-E or Mid-Journey can create all sorts of pictures nowadays.
Be careful, because if you put ChatGPT in Barcelona, maybe you've got a big crash.
Right. But here, let me give you just a flavor of what prediction can do, right? So here, let me ask you a question. Do you guys order things on Amazon, or what's the local e-commerce?
Well, you've got some Amazon Globals, you've got Deliverers, there's lots of services,
right.
yeah.
So here, let's imagine that if Amazon can predict your consumption behavior perfectly.
They actually do.
Yeah, almost there, right? Yeah. If they can predict your consumption behavior perfectly, what can they do? Right. Really think through this, right? For example, I'm just thinking aloud here, right? Is that you no longer need to go to their website. They just send a box to you.
You actually don't need to.
Yeah, why do they have to learn from you? Yeah, I can predict you exactly. Tomorrow, just send the box to you. On the occasion I predict wrongly, you can return it.
But they actually did.
Yeah, they've
got the subscriptions now, Amazon, and they can send you the coffee 6 weeks later because they know you're running out of.
Right. Yeah. So the only reason they haven't done it systematically is the prediction power is not that high yet. But we're not that far from it, given the progress here, right? So you can ask the same question. Suppose we can predict people's travel behavior precisely tomorrow for every single Barcelonian here. How will we run transportation differently? Right? I think that's a fair question today. We're close to the point that we can do it, right? Here, I'm just give you one example. In London, we actually predicted using within the public transit, right? So suppose that we know your entire travel history. Can we predict your next trip? Right. In London, the case is a little bit complicated. As a user, you wake up in the morning, you decide, do I travel or not? Then you say, do I travel at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock? Then do I start with Angel or Barbican? Then I go to St. James Park or Victoria. So the whole chain of decision-making here, combined with complex process, right? But it turns out, this is my own lab, you can predict based on the existing regularities. You can see that history repeats itself. Right? This, without explaining the legend, you can kind of have a sense of this at home, this is your work or school, this is kind of the transportation part. So as long as you can observe these patterns, you can actually predict people's travel behavior to a high degree. That's what we're able to achieve. We can predict about 90% accuracy for the origin, 80% about destination, 7% of departure. That's like 7 years ago. So today you can predict even more.
No, I was just wondering, and maybe our audience today is also wondering, if they can predict or they know us as good as they know us, because they know us very well, I believe that in a way we could go to work every single day with the prediction of our Google Maps sending us in a different route so that we don't meet at the same street at Diagonal or at Aragon or whatever, in a way that we don't kind of meet all together in the same places every single day and make the city to work in a more efficient way.
Right. That's a very good point, right? That's a very good point. I think in principle, we have the technology to do that now. We can actually route people either to transit, cycling, or car in a way that really maximizes the efficiency for everybody, right? But the trouble is the following. The solution that's optimal for the whole city may not be the solution for you individually. Mm-hmm. So, for example, people, for the sake of the whole city, you have to detour by adding 10 minutes. Would you do it? You probably would do it, but can you convince everybody to do it, right? That's where the private interest, this user individual organization versus this collective organization may often at odds of each other, right? Then a more difficult question as Google, right? Do I have the right to dictate what you travel?
Absolutely.
Right. So that's kind of the question. But I think the technology is enabling us to do that. The question is how we collectively are making the decision for that, right?
Yeah, and who's governing the decisions also.
Right. Yeah.
Not Google, maybe the city or maybe whoever's.
Right. Actually, that's a good point. If you push it logically into autonomous vehicle here, right? If we are using autonomous vehicle or autonomous bus, I'm talking in the general thing. Autonomous vehicle, now we refer to automation only in the sense of this micro-level control. Acceleration, deceleration, turn left, turn right, right? But automation can be much higher level. For example, they can say, let me give you a different route choice. I route you a different path, as you say, right? But they can even do more. They even can suggest you a different destination choice. So for example, tonight you want to go for dinner in some restaurant. They say, oh, Jinhua, you're supposed to go healthy today. Let me route you to a vegetarian restaurant, right? So here, by that time, do people feel even comfortable here, right? So are we losing our agency to machines? That's another big area that we should discuss. Right. So, so lastly, I'll just to say the behavior and computation combination, right? Let me mention one thing. You may have heard of the term machine learning. That's the kind of technology underpinning the artificial intelligence. Let me give you a sense of how behavior theory and machine learning is combined these days, right? For a long time, we have two different school of thoughts. One is the domain-specific model. See, I'm a transportation scholar, I develop transportation theories. Or I'm a biologist, I develop molecules based on my theory. And then this machine learning model thought, which says, I don't have any substantive theory. I don't understand transportation or chemistry or anything, but I just have a bunch of data. I just dump into them finding patterns, right? For a long time, this is the conventional notion of which one is better at what certain situation. So for example, the machine learning model often have a very high prediction power, right? We actually had a meeting, conference at UC Berkeley a couple of years ago. We brought transportation scholars and computer science together, right? One computer science comes to me saying, Jinhua, you know, I never learned transportation. I don't know your theories. It's just my model predicts better than yours, right? This is a conversation actually happening to many, many domains. You could be material scientists, molecular biologists, all those domains. They're being asked the same question here, right? So is the domain knowledge still useful, right? Of course, it's very frustrating. And then what's the advantage of having a theory or having a domain knowledge? There are two notions. One is the domain knowledge allow you to interpret. So we know what's going on in the model. We can explain it, right? One big issue of this today is this large language model like GPT-4 or ChatGPT, etc., is that not only we don't understand it, even the developer of the model himself do not understand it. That's what we really concern as a danger. So we're losing interoperability here, right? That's one thing. The second one is robustness. Robustness meaning once you design a system, if you have a small disturbance, right, would that really shock the system or not, right? It turns out that if you have a theory-based model, you're more robust, right? You can deal with these noises. But if it's a machine learning model, changing one small bit, the whole model may suddenly collapse without reason.
Model when you studied China, for example, you measured China in 2012, right?
Yeah.
In 2012.
Right.
And I was thinking, how frequently should you map again the system? Because the evolution is so fast. I mean, in the 80s, if someone would ask, how's going to be the transportation in the city in 20 years' time, probably everyone would say the same.
Yeah.
But now it's so difficult to predict. So how frequently should you map again a city, a country, or a society?
Yeah, that's a great question. For that, I do think these days the changing of a norm is accelerating, right? For example, one thing I think COVID did to people is many of us are more in the reflective mode. COVID for 2 years, you start at home, you think about things, right? You think about, do I want to continue my career? Do I really like my boss? What about I change it, right? So many people think about this, more reflective, right? The second one is people are more agitated. People have some sort of anger they need to compress into 2 years. They want to express somehow, right? So here, these 2 years, I do think may change the norm quite a bit, right? It's definitely a good time to remeasure many of these conditions here, right? So on this, this is kind of the conventional wisdom about the domain-specific model versus machine learning models, right? Here, of course, the current attempt is the two sides reconcile each other, try to say, can we bring the two together so we have a better understanding from both the machine learning side and the domain-specific side. Here's some attempt of how we bring the travel behavior theory and the machine learning together to enhance both the prediction but also interoperability here. Right. So I wouldn't get into the detail in this one. But the general idea is saying that the theory provide a main structure here, like this main structure, but the machine learning gives the local details on that. So that's one sense of looking at this, right? Lastly, I'll just say a behavior perspective of artificial intelligence. I recommend this book, Think Fast and Slow, by Dan Kahneman. He tried to say that when we make a decision, right, we think we are making a decision as this conscious part of the brain. But much of our decision is actually made by this big elephant here. It's an unconscious part of the brain. We do things that without being recognizing it, right? For a long time, the artificial intelligence in the 60s and the 70s, following the idea of we model this. That's generation one of artificial intelligence. Today's artificial intelligence based on different neural network is kind of using this subconscious part of the brain's model, right? But of course, the future is to say that most experts, both on the computer science side and psychology side, the future is really you bring the two together to have a deeper understanding of this, right? All right. So lastly, I'll just conclude with this notion. How do we bring this together to decarbonize mobility, right? Before that, let me ask you guys a question here. What do you have for dinner last night? What do you have for dinner? Fish. How about you? Nothing. Yeah. How about you? Yeah. Fish. Okay. Yeah. How about you?
Some artichokes. I had some edamame also.
Oh, okay. Oh, nice. Nice. Yeah. So, how much did the meal cost you last night? €3. €3. How about yours? You're a fancy guy. You can guess.
It should be the same.
$30, €30.
No, it was at home. I made it.
Yeah,
You're invited. It was at home.
Next question. How much time does it take you to have that dinner? To eat? Yeah. 5 minutes? 10 minutes? You? Half an hour?
So it took 30 minutes.
30 minutes, yeah. How much carbon does that meal, your meal actually embodies? Carbon dioxide in this process. Yeah. Yeah, emission of carbon in order to make that meal. Yeah. Do you have? Yeah. Most of them, we have no clue.
No idea.
Right? No clue. So here I'll just use an example to say that for every aspect of life, we have a sophisticated accounting system for money, have a sophisticated accounting system for time, and we have zero understanding of carbon. Right. So that's just reality here. Right. So what I really want to push is this, to say that we should treat money, time, and carbon as three fundamental pillars of our social accounting. So in the sense that if I bought this jacket, say it cost me €50, take me 20 minutes to buy, this embodies 30 kilograms of CO2, for example, right? This glass of water. So every single thing we do, money, time, or carbon. I think that's the foundation we're really serious about climate change and doing things. If we don't account things, don't measure things, we're not going to change it, right? So that's one thing. So here, for that, that's where we can link this national commitment. Spence says by 2030 we're going to do whatever, right? Or United States says to the individual's action here. Every single one of us can do, right? So we are making a small effort here. This company is a small startup we set up with my friends here, is to try to capture the carbon emission in mobility. So for example, today you take the train to come from your home here, we can calculate how much carbon it takes. Or if you drive a car, how much carbon it takes. If you're walking, how much carbon it takes. So that's one thing to do, right? So that's the ending remark. So I try to give the three: behavior, computation, and the idea is to try to really bring the behavior science thinking, emotional, social, and perceptual, together with transportation technologies, electrification, automation, sharing, etc. Right? And bring them together to three things. The first one is to understand and shape behavior. Right? The second one is to design more interesting systems. And last one is to reform policy. Right. All right. Yeah. So here, the behavior thinking really helps us identify the opportunity, and the computational thing can help us offer the solution. Right. With that, thank you everybody so much for today.
Works. If not, I'll,
it works. Wow.
Yeah, it works. When you were saying you were talking about carbon, I was thinking that it's great to measure carbon in mobility.
Yeah.
But today was just an hour ago or a couple of hours ago. I was in the radio talking about with one a founder of a startup, which was very interesting, and we were talking about the emissions of carbon of ChatGPT. And all this artificial intelligence, and we're saying that just to train this ChatGPT thing was exactly the equivalent of, and that's a Massachusetts study, 550 flights from New York to Washington, I think it was. So many times we tend to think on flights, on mobility, but afterwards we're talking with ChatGPT.
Right.
And for example, one simple conversation with ChatGPT is around half liter of water. And the medium data center of Google in Italy, not the big one, it's emptying or using the water of 2 Olympic swimming pools a day. So yeah,
on that, the future in terms of energy consumption, the physical movement, physical production will still be an important part, but more and more computation will be a major source of energy consumption.
Yeah.
Right. ChatGPT, this large language model training example. Another more difficult one is blockchain.
Yeah,
The interest in this blockchain thing is kind of
mining and all those things.
But there are a lot of attempts of changing that. For example, at MIT, we have several colleagues working on this low energy chips, right? Low energy AI design, so that we can still reach the same computational power, but reduce or condense the deep neural network so that it's much more efficient. That can talk about several order of magnitude reduction of energy consumption there. So I think there's good progress.
It's interesting, yeah. Okay, so we're on the last 6, 8, 10 minutes of this conversation. So if any of you would like to ask something to Professor Jinhua Zhao, of course you're invited to. There's a question here. I don't know if we can grab a mic, please. Yeah, they'll bring a mic in a sec, I'm sure. While we get the mic, I wanted to ask you, in between what you said about the ownership of a car versus the access, car usage versus ownership, because we were talking before about this, and the fact of bringing this into a commodity changed the whole thing, right?
Right. Yeah, that's right. So here, if you think about the notion of pride, right? The most come from owning something, right? Here we actually studied the, right here.
No, go away.
Yeah, go ahead.
If you can bring, please, the mic. Thank you very much. We'll move it around, and if not, I'll stand up.
Right, so the classic question is often asked is between behavior and attitude, which cause what? Is behavior cause attitude or attitude cause behavior, right? So it's because you have a car, therefore you have a car pride, or you have car pride, therefore you buy a car, right? So we actually decompose into the following. There's car ownership, there's car use, and then there's car pride. The relation works like this. If you have a car, you're more likely to use the car. The car usage triggered the accumulation of a car pride. And once car pride is there, it kind of encourages you to buy more cars. So it goes to like this direction.
So this is like when having music. I've got this discs at home from the Beatles or from Mark Knopfler, and then you say I've got it in Spotify.
Right.
It's not that exciting, right?
Right.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor, for your conference. The question is that in the most of the cases, what's the relation between the car pride and the ownership of the car? But you know that the new trend is the car as a service. That in the future, the new generations will not buy a car, they will use a car. So my question is about the relation between this car pride and the usage of the car when you are not owner of the car. From my experience, I think that there is a relation. So it's not the same if you own a car, but it's not the same if you, for example, if you lease a car for 4 years, or you rent a car for some days, or a subscription for months, or car sharing only for some hours, or a taxi.
Right.
So it means, is there a relation between this car pride and saying that the longer you use the car, more relation with the car pride? So what I have learned is that if you lease a car for 3 or 4 years, car pride is important, it's a way of self-expression, showing your way of life. But if you take a taxi, no, taxi, no.
Not taxi.
Right.
So did you study that? Is
Yeah,
there a relation
that's important. That's an important question there, right? First of all, let me introduce the difference between personal pride versus the social pride, right? Certain things you feel pride is to yourself, right? So, for example, if the sense of pride is saying that now I'm established, right? I get my first salary, I can buy my own car now instead of rely on my parents. That's personal, right? Versus the pride that exists to show off to other people. Right? Depending on which pride we're talking about, the translation to the actual behavior are different, right? So to your question between owning a car, leasing a car, then use ride sharing, I would say when you get down to the ride sharing part, right, the notion of pride probably goes to very, very small, goes to zero almost, right? If you're using a taxi for that moment, it's a fancy car, smaller car, it doesn't matter that much on this, right? You cannot show off to your friends that, oh, I take a taxi, that's fancy. It doesn't make sense, right? So here you have to push to the other way if you want the pride, right? But from a societal point of view, why do we want the pride to be associated with car, right? That's the question that we should ask. Yeah, the fact that car pride diminishing because of moving to sharing, that may be a good thing for if you care about sustainability, right? But if, of course, again, we're conscious we are sitting in CASA, right? As car makers, purely as a business question, right? Car pride leads to profit margin. If you destroy the car pride, you destroy the car profit margin. You can sell many family cars with a large revenue, but the margin will be small, right? I'm just only stating this as objective business kind of concept here.
Makes sense. And it's interesting, this, I didn't have in mind that element. When you rent a car in leasing or renting for 4 years, do you feel the same as when you buy it and you pay for all in once?
Right.
It's not the same, right?
Yeah, I think it's more your own feeling about it. Right,
it's interesting, the way you feel it. Like,
you're not telling your friends if you buy it, if you lease, right?
That's true. That's like I've got a house in.
Customize the car, then you feel this pride.
You make, you make it your own.
Yes, exactly.
That's interesting.
Even
Yeah.
you know that after 4 years is going to be another. It's your car.
You have to put the.
I think you can build this pride with other things. Imagine an avatar in metaverso, and you create an avatar, and all the things that you do, you get more pride because you are improving the world. No?
Yeah.
You are going by food.
Right.
And
Right.
you are in the metaverso with your pride, with your avatar.
Right.
No, but that's very interesting.
Yeah.
There are even some, well, you all know, but some car brands which they can, especially in luxury segment, which they can give you an NFT so that you can have your car in the metaverse, so that when you get into that game, you go with your car, and that prize is even double.
Right.
So you have to make a study with the metaverse. That's a bit big, but you can go. There is a question here.
Yes. Wonderful presentation. I love it.
Thank you.
And I have a kind of a long commute in terms of European standards, and I very much wish I could reduce it, or maybe find a job where I can take public transportation, because I live not too far from public transportation, and the ultimate in happiness would be to walk to work. However, when everything is perfect and there's no traffic jam and I drive to work, it's rather pleasant. I put a podcast, I listen to my podcast, and I feel this sort of communion with myself and the car and
Yeah, we like driving.
Yeah.
So and it's wonderful, right? But
Yeah.
I do agree that it's not the most sustainable
Right.
thing,
Yeah.
and my quality of life would improve tremendously if I could walk to work.
Right. You know, that's interesting.
But that also has
that-
to do with the time absolute that you were referring to.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So here are two thoughts, right? One is we often make this joke in US cities is while everybody else use public transit, I drive my own car, right? So that's of course, if everybody thinks that way, then you are stuck in the traffic here, right? That's why ants don't go into traffic. For them, the collective mindset is dominant, right? There. For us, we are mostly individualized on this, right? Then also to the point about the travel experience. If you have a commute of 40 minutes, depending on the situation, you may enjoy it or hate it very differently, right? Again, this is quoting the data from America. They look at 25 different activities you do in the day. I watch TV, talking with friends, having dinner, going to work, returning from work, work itself, and then the whole ranking of happiness of the 25 activities, right? Then in the bottom three are three things: AM commuting, work, and PM commuting. So transportation as a professional, we failed miserably on this, right? So here, how do we not only reducing the time, but improve the quality of the time? I think that's a major question I think we should ask.
Okay, I'm going to ask you the last thing. I don't know if there's any other question, because we need to finish with the session afterwards. We can talk about it all together. But I was wondering, and if there's any other question, just I'd like to see your hand so that I can ask for a mic. But we were saying that one of the first clicks, let's say, in our mind as kids is when you get old, and the first sign of an adult is that you get a car. But now the teenagers don't think the same. Many of them don't even want the license, so how is that changing the whole thing? Is the pride changing? Is their need changing? Is that they have different priorities? Is that, I don't know.
Yeah,
because that will change also in cultures.
Right.
Also it depends.
So that's a great question. We're still puzzled about it, actually. We only have data. We did a study on this, right? Try to say, is the difference generational or only age related, right? We did study up to 2017. We find that the young people behave differently. But if you control their income level, control their family structure, control their where to live, they behave just like before.
Interesting.
But that's up to 2017. So the fact that you find they don't get car anymore, etc., is only because they are poor and they are not married yet. They don't even. So that's only true up to 2017. We don't have data between 2017 to now. Something fundamentally changed. So if you control for income, family structure, young people really behave differently. That's where if the car price really changed, that's a much more fundamental question here, right? So that's one thought. The second thought is previously people are isolated. If you want to gather with a friend, you have to drive and to do things, right? Today you have much other ways of communicating or connecting the virtual way. So therefore substitute the need of this physical travel. That's another theory. But I don't think it's ever conclusive answer that yet.
Makes sense. Okay, last two questions. First the lady and afterwards we finish with.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I wanted to add something to this because I'm 30 years old and I just got my drive lessons last year.
Congrats.
So concerning Mr. Stature, I just get my success in life last year, something like that. But I don't have a car, and even my parents have a car and is available whenever I want it. I don't use it, and I'm not driving right now. And I don't have in mind to get a car in the next 5 or maybe 10 years. But for example, I was thinking about buying my own home. Because for me, it's more important this, even if it's really very expensive to buy a car, than having something like this. And I also think it's because I live in Barcelona, and I'm really used to get the public transportation or to walk, because this is a city that give you all these chances to these other options for transport and to travel. So I wanted to actually ask a question about the young generations and what is expected to happen, because I think I could talk about it.
Yeah, first of all, you should feel lucky you are living in Barcelona, right? Thanks to see. Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, because I can think that it is not happening in other cities, maybe in Europe, little cities, but obviously not in the States or in Latin America and on other bigger cities.
So this is a bit like, what do we do, doctor?
Right.
Is she okay?
That's right, yeah. So here, actually, I'm similar with you. I got my license and car when I'm 30, when I had my son, Duco. Yeah, that in America become really necessity. I cannot live a life with kids, etc., without car. That's right. So here, indeed, the difference between like building one is really critical here, right? For America and Europe, you can see the contrast. I think big question is the one from developing country, where they are urbanizing, they are building their cities at this stage. So what type of city are they building? That's the important question. Yeah, are they following a European model or following a Europe model? Here, I really hope that they come to Barcelona more and learn this human setup as their model.
Okay, let's go with the last short question, please.
It's very short. It's a comment about the younger people starting to lose interest in driving. And I think it's very interesting socially because it means one less ritual, coming of age ritual. It used to be when, thousands of years ago or hundreds of years ago, we had lots of rituals in different parts of our lives, right? And they've been kind of disappearing, right? And I think getting a driver's license used to be a ritual because it meant your freedom, right? You're an adult, and you get your freedom, you get to go with your friends and so forth, or travel. You know that, and that is kind of diminishing in importance, right? And I wonder, you know, how would that affect the future generations?
Yeah, I mean, here the thing is, I'm not saying we should get rid of pride. We cannot get rid of pride. It's towards which object or which event, which experience we develop the pride here, right? We can find alternative rituals for our younger generations here.
Jinhua, this has been great. I mean, I love listening to you. I listened to you 1 more hour than them. I mean, I had a bit of advantage, and I read a lot about you. I invite you to follow him or to read his papers and to some of the videos you've got, which are amazing. It was great to have you here. Jinhua Zhao, Professor Zhao, sorry, I said Zhao, but the Z with the H sounds as J.
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
So Jinhua Zhao.
Your daughter is learning Chinese. You have a trick to tell her.
I'm kind of, yeah. So he's founded, directed MIT Mobility Initiative and the Mobility Forum and so on. It was a pleasure. Thank you very much, and also to your family who are so patient and also your sons listening to Daddy, having all this knowledge. Thank you very much to all of you. It was great making this session a bit more interactive and to learn so much with you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everybody.